I just want to reiterate a very specific point that I made in that video, which is the coronavirus is a complete hoax, and if you have any belief whatsoever in it being a naturally occurring disease that we should wear masks and quarantine from to avoid, you've completely forfeited your intelligence. And if you want to argue with me about that, I'm not going to argue with you about that, because I don't want to waste my time when there are blatant facts on the internet, among other places. So, but besides that, today, I want to reveal some more injustice that is going unnoticed widely throughout our society. Particularly, I'm going to go into Alcoholics Anonymous today. Its origins, what it's doing, but specifically it's a religious organization, and not the kumbaya type. It's the very repent or perish. You are inherently selfish and must sign your will over to a fearful God. Yes, that's exactly what I said. People who receive DUIs, drug charges, people in prisons, people in psych wards, students found smoking or drinking, etc., or even just people who are thought of to be addicts, and note that they include psychedelic users, marijuana users under this label too, not just what we typically think of in addiction. So it's a very, it's an inherently flawed system that I would say is killing off those who do not fit the rich, white government worker bill, those who do not sign their will and their lives over to the care of a God as we understood him, which is the first step. And also note that when you begin attending these meetings, or when they forcefully come for you, when you're, being raped and drugged in a psychiatric institution somewhere in West Baltimore, they tell you specifically, make the group your God until you find one of your own, because they rely on the nihilistic depression of people in order to lure them in. Alcoholics Anonymous has a long history of sexual abuse, particularly with the Q group, based in Washington, D.C. Coincidentally, which also, and note that the meeting that was founded by the Q group, I think his name was Mike Q, is still functioning today, and it's the largest AA meeting in the world, I think, besides one that was founded by the same group on the West Coast. So, and Mike Q would prey upon young women, assign them sponsors, which I'll go into later. Well, your sponsor essentially is someone who you must call every day, who tells you everything you have to do, and if you don't do what they say, more likely than not, they get you sent away to rehab or jail with the guise of your best interest in mind, quote unquote. And sponsors can be incredibly fear-mongering, incredibly, the only requirement for someone to be a sponsor is for them to have more sobriety time than you. So, and more often than not, people who survive for long amounts of time of quote-unquote sobriety, which really isn't sobriety because they normally replace their addiction with sex or media addiction or nicotine addiction or just absolute delusional thinking. And so these are not people you want to guide you. And they will often tell you if you can't subscribe to their the will of the group, that just go out and drink again and drink as much as you can, hit your quote-unquote bottom, aka go to the brink of death and then come back to us. So these sponsors, which are normally, you're supposed to have a woman sponsor if you're a woman and a male sponsor if you're a male, this completely leaves out gender fluid people. It also completely leaves out gay people. My best friend Alex Lukanov, who was killed off by this group, faced immense strife for speaking out against it and talking about what was going on, and also for being a gay man, and was essentially, I'll go into the nature of his death later, but yeah, so the Q group, which is now Midtown, which is still functioning, would assign men to young women, and the women would have to do sexual favors for these men in order to, they were told that was the only way they would stay sober. And these practices have not ended. They've just have a different veil now, where women are told not to date for the first year, and then pretty soon after the first year, they end up having an AA boyfriend. That's kind of what people are promised, and they're, two, it's, the AA boyfriend, though, I must say, is, normally much older, normally paired off by people within the group, which I've noticed. And it seems as if it's a machine for generating children. And also, if you gain enough time in the group, you're allowed to sit at the front of the meeting. You're allowed to speak in front of 400 people at the meeting, which is this note that their meetings, they speak the same story with the same thesis and statements to create group cohesion. This is a cult. This is a cult that is directly embedded with the U.S. government. And furthermore, the more time you have, and the more you begin to repeat what they say, embody what they say, bring in newcomers, quote unquote, devote your life to this organization because they pretty much demand of you to go to a meeting every single day. And if you're a full-time slave, like most people are, it takes up most of your free time. And what's truly horrifying about that is I've noticed this pattern from the time that I was forced into it by my parents, and I'll extrapolate upon that more also, but most people are then, once they achieve sobriety, they receive immense connections. And noticing that achieving an amount of sobriety in this group is almost impossible unless you are conformist and unless you forfeit your critical thinking, and unless you submit your entire life to the will of a cult that that asks for donations every meeting, that pressures you into donating every meeting, and each year thousands upon thousands of dollars go missing in the corporation. They aren't documented for, and it's a corporation. It is not a nonprofit. Yeah, so my parents met in Alcoholics Anonymous, or through Alcoholics Anonymous, and when I was, I'm just going to say this, I'm not trying to make people uncomfortable by talking about this. I just feel like it needs to be discussed. When I was a victim of child sex trafficking, almost all of the doctors, government officials, people who sexually abused me, I was told, were either clients of my parents or members of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I'm just going to leave that there. But there's so much more to divulge into this. I just feel like it's truly a beast, a true beast, preying upon people. Because if you think about the level of addiction that most people go through in their life at some point, and the amount of people in Alcoholics Anonymous, and how the number of people in this group stays relatively the same, and it's the same people in these groups, but new people come in all the time, and then normally through court appointments or normally through pressuring parents also. And I talked in my first discussion, which I think I called Reality, Godhood, and the Lie of Mental Illness, about how in our modern society, having children has become a social obligation rather than an actual labor of love or means of incorporating the divine and a devotion to life itself. And so because of that, children are learned to survive by forfeiting their own feelings and thoughts to their parents' control in order to survive. And we learn this subconsciously at a very young age. So me and Alex and many other people who I know who have left these groups, that's the main reason they were forced into it. And also because these groups, as I said before, have special access to prisons, psych wards, rehabs that other groups do not, and other groups do not even, want to involve themselves in. It's easier to attend an AA meeting in prison than it is to get an education. But as to go into the history of this group, AA was founded, I believe, in the 1930s, 1920s, and is an extension of the Oxford groups, which were devoutly religious, biblical groups that discuss the same principle of turning your will and your life over to a power higher than yourself. Particularly, it was founded by Bill Wilson, who has become the posthumous cult leader of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he's known for writing the Big Book, which is the Bible of this group. And the Big Book is based on fabricated science, saying that there are alcoholics and there are people who are not alcoholics, and people who are alcoholics are people who have an allergy to the substance, meaning that because they are allergic, they like their allergy and it affects them differently, and therefore it's a bodily issue. But simultaneously, they also say in the book that the alcoholic is an alcoholic because they are inherently selfish. And they will always be that way, and they need to have a daily reprieve in order to heal. Incredibly depressing and false to the nature of our infinite consciousness and ability to overcome anything, and I think the innate goodness of the human being that is discussed in universally all ancient sacred texts, which is, funny because the group says that they're religious. So, yes, and so the first groups of Alcoholics Anonymous were very small, and universally very little women, almost all the upper class. And some very interesting names show up in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, particularly Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, who, if we look at the, people amongst that clan, especially, I think we should also understand, too, that these demagogue families, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, have been funding wars and political turmoil for their own exponential monetary gain for hundreds of years. And also, but the really fucked up thing about this group is that the 12th step says that a spiritual experience is what brought Bill specifically, and later turned into the anonymous alcoholic of the character, per se, that people are forced to identify with and psychologically begin to mirror in their own lives in order to feel accepted by the group. But anyhow, the spiritual experience Bill had from belladonna treatment, which I think belladonna is salvia divinorum, which is similar to DMT, which is, I think it's only illegal in a few, maybe 6 or 7 states now, but it's legal, and it's I highly recommend it, although most people smoke it when in the sacred ceremonial practices you're actually supposed to eat the leaves. Kathleen Harrison wrote about Salvia Divinorum in her essay, The Edge of the Garden. But furthermore, but because this group completely disavows all forms of drugs, but not nicotine and not coffee, which are some of the most addictive and life-stunting chemicals enmeshed in our society. And it seems so that they're able to survive because they don't hinder productivity, and they also don't cause any societal questioning. Two, that they are highly addictive without much alteration of the level of consciousness, so they're very profitable too. So because of that, naive, quote-unquote, alcoholics within this group spend their entire time there awaiting a spiritual experience that isn't going to happen because they do not have access to the sacred plants that Bill Wilson did. Bill Wilson, too, when he was writing the book, was very interested in occultism. And this is not to disavow the occult. I'm actually very supportive and adore modern Wiccan practices, hoodoo, ancestor magic, you name it. I think that this is a part of the archaic revival that Terence McKenna was talking about, and its direct link to shamanism. And we should all explore the depths of our psyche and our spiritual connections as well, whatever form that takes. But it seems as if Bill Wilson was convening with demonic spirits via his Ouija board, and that the god that was talking to him in his head was through this means were actually demonic spirits. And as a medium, I wish I could say, I wish I could say that all spirits are well-intentioned and pure, loving beings, but that is not true. The spiritual realm is as vast as our physical realm and more. So we really do have to practice high levels of discernment in these spaces. But I think, too, with the direct entwinement of Alcoholics Anonymous and our legal system, and to extend upon that, the war on drugs, which I won't go too much into the history of the war on drugs, but which was essentially created as another means of hindering the liberation of minority communities, and also to fund CIA and American cohort drug trafficking. And we can see, the what this has become in our world today, where addicts are punished, and it seems that addicts are given the opportunity to avoid punishment through joining this cult. But I warn you very much, this cult will ensure your institutionalization or death if you do not completely conform and give up your entire life for this group. So, and with Gabor Mate, I really love his discussions of addiction and its origins and trauma, which is very true. And I know this from personal experience and my friends. Um, but I am very critical of his support for this group. And he even mentions it in one of his talks, how he doesn't like how the group asks people to stand up and say, I am an alcoholic. Because I don't think we realize the power, the complete creationary power of our words. And to label ourselves as anything really creates barriers upon the infinitude of our being and what we can manifest through it as an infinite consciousness. I'm not, so with also too, I don't think we realize that addiction is advertised in especially children's media. At least I grew up during the early 2000s, so I'm most well acquainted with that. But what I remember so vividly too was this kind of I think reverse psychology, which even people who know nothing of psychology know that. The fact that drug abuse and was always mentioned on these television shows and played off as, at the party and they're drinking and it's bad and it's dangerous, but she's free and she's doing something. And I think, and so I don't know exactly how to go into the specifics of this, but we even see that in where it's romanticized, and I think many poets and novelists have become kind of succumbed to this, and filmmakers have succumbed to this to, make their own struggles beautiful, and I comprehend that, but we also can't deny that there is a specific lore of it where people, and I think too, there is power in turning our stories into art, but at the same time, we must be very careful about the messages we are sending, because I don't think we have any time anymore to create art that doesn't uplift the soul and that doesn't stir wonder and meaning and hope and a nurturance of all we are. Because even I noticed this too, where because we are because of our mirror neurons and the embeddedness of our sense of self in our environment, even if a song comes on the radio that's wailing about something, some breakup or something, we put ourselves into that mind state to subconsciously even to relate, because we naturally rely on relation as means of survival. So, and what's very frightening to me is Alcoholics Anonymous is present in countless media outlets. Countless shows, it seemed like even a couple of years ago, I didn't want to see this movie, but I went. I won't go into the specifics there, but to see Beautiful Boy, with Timothy Chalamet, I believe, and Steve Carell.
I really don't want to mention any actors or movies in my philosophical discussions or uh, discussions about these injustices going on. But just as an example, um, the whole movie centered around AA saving him from addiction. Meanwhile, he was this rich kid. No one knew what he was going through to cause it. And there were countless times throughout the film where you could see that it was ineffective. That's the main thing. Alcoholics Anonymous is ineffective. It does not address the core causes of addiction, which is a sense of alienation, which is lack of meaning in the universe and lack of access to the infinite cosmos within. And because it is so dogmatic, because it creates these platitudes that are circulated like currency, because it enforces gender roles with women being told not to date for the first year, and also too the force that you must, they tell you, do not talk to anyone who is not in this group. All of your friends must also be in this group because they just assume everyone else is an alcoholic. But what is most scary to me is how the group bullies, and I mentioned this before, but I want to really stress this, how it bullies and sends away anyone who questions and says it's bullshit. And that it seems, they need to have people in the group die of overdoses or whatever addictions, cause death in order to continue to function, because if they don't have some kind of story, they sap story. They don't, and also too, the group relies on promises of monetary success. And that's the main thing people use to say that they are sober. When it seems very clear to me that at least the groups around the Washington, D.C. area are so riddled with pathology and lack of critical thinking and genuine honesty, too, because the group, when you initially come, they ask you to tell them your whole life story. That's a part of the first step, so you have to confess all your sins or whatever, and then they hold it against you. They have that information. And so, if you leave, they will report you to the police and will get you sent away. And in most states throughout the U.S., I'm pretty sure all of them, I have to check again, but if someone calls the police and says, this person is a threat to themselves, this person is mentally ill, the police are required to come take you and take you to a psych ward regardless of anything. And the psych wards are required to diagnose you with a mental illness, no matter what, to justify your being there. They have a drug for everything. The drugs also have ridiculous symptoms and side effects. But back to my point here is it's very unfortunate what happens to see people get pushed away and feel like this is their only option, that there's nothing else, and then it's contributing to the death rates. And as I briefly said earlier in this talk, it was used for my mother, Hope Cullen, to sex traffic me. So that's there. And my best friend Alex Lukanov, his death is very suspicious. His death was turned into an AA meeting, even though he renounced the group with me, and we were beginning the We Are All Shamans movement, which empowers individuals to embody their all-knowing being, their omniscient being, their supernatural being, and their shamanic abilities, their supernatural abilities, their artistic abilities, and also to create a society that no longer intentionally causes trauma in individuals, that forces them into wage slavery, that puts them under chemical warfare within the foods, fumes, and physical medications that are being forced up, and completely ends all forms of imprisonment, enslavement, and allows us to return back to nature. So, and it's very, because I remember maybe a couple weeks before Alex died, we were really diving into the whole thing and realizing how, because AA and the U.S. government function in tandem, it is a part of the warfare upon the soul of mankind and the earth, AA. And especially, too, because many police are a part of these groups, and learn to send people to these groups when they find AA. I was walking around D.C. Maybe a month ago, and I looked on the sidewalk, and I saw a memorial carving to Bill Wilson. And I think Dr. Bob, quote unquote, was the other man. But it's hard because there are people in these groups, and I don't think, we should fear people. I don't think we should fear anything at all. So this is not to, but this is truly to illuminate what's going on, and also to, I wish I mentioned this earlier, how AA is directly funneling people off of whatever drug they're taking and onto psychiatric medication. I remember one sponsor I was forced to have would not even be my sponsor, and had one of her other sponsees call the cops on me when I wouldn't take my medication. And so it's very scary. And so the group, it functions on the predication that the human being or the alcoholic is inherently sick. And I just, we don't have time anymore to waste in dwelling upon our limitations and excuses. There is work to do. There is art to be made. There are discoveries to be made within the cosmic realm. We have an entire universe at our fingertips with psychedelic drugs and other forms of returning to ecstasy. But we have the potential and the ability to live in bliss, to live in harmony. But it seems as if there is a force enforcing stupidity and addiction. And that's, too, what I think is so frustrating about Alcoholics Anonymous, is it enforces thought forms. It enforces addictive thought forms. I did this, so I have to confess it, and I have to talk about how negative I am. Therefore, that will make me better in the light of God, which is a circular issue, and it creates an endless cycle. And so, I really yeah, I really, from here, want to just say, um, the group um, pretty much does not allow for any disagreement. It becomes an echo chamber. And also, because of the false science that fuels the group's hegemony, um, it has hindered scientific research, and I have many issues with the way that science is being practiced today, um, because of its lack of ethical standards, and also it seems like it's belief that things aren't true unless they arise the same every single time, which is creating a belief paradigm that our lives should be repetitive and that's all there is, without wonder and newness. And we even see too how within academia, people, I forget his name, but the man who found the electric universe theory, because they didn't fit this model of this empirical Cartesian model of what is, their findings, their physical findings, have been ignored. We see this too with Rupert Sheldrake, who found the morphogenetic field, which I think is one of the most amazing postulations of today, which shows that things act in pattern, but from that the pattern can move, and that this pattern exists in a morphogenetic field, which is outside of physicality, which affirms the spiritual realm even furthermore. I didn't give his idea justice, I think, in that explanation, but yes, so with Alcoholics Anonymous, influencing so many members of the government, and receiving so many funding from the government, and it has really seeped into the collective mind that the human being is inherently selfish, and it seems to be a continuation of the old church. And, well, I was trying to say this earlier, but my best friend, before he died, he found that that 12 steps became almost universal, and that 12 steps, he found some website about the 12 steps of Jesus, and how some really poor dude was talking about how the 12 steps, he was 6 months or 1 year sober from abandonment issues. So it's creating a cap or a barrier from real conscious introspection, and removing the thought forms that cause behavior that is unnecessary, because it serves to further a group. And yeah, I think yeah, this is an issue very heavy on my heart. This is an issue
conversation with Deb brings me out of my raving. Not out of it, if anything, just a chance to recharge, reevaluate. Not even reevaluate, but just, sink into the peace. I forget where I was, but I'm trying to think if there's anything really pertinent to say about this issue. And I want to relate it to a larger problem in the world, which is that the ego clings to ailments, illnesses, things of difference in order to justify its suffering and its addiction to suffering. And because I've noticed people love being victims because then they are blameless. And my next video is going to be about spiritual bypassing, but I think this relates to it also, which is well, exactly that, really, which is we're at a growth spurt in our being, and I don't think we really have time to make excuses anymore for why we can't do things. Even in our most menial personal days, if we want to do something, if we know we should be doing something, like for me, working on my philosophy, we should be doing it. And there's personal responsibility. We cannot blame being a selfish alcoholic on our problems. That's what I noticed was for my parents, they used even like when I was their child struggling with their abuse, they would use their alcoholism as a justification for why they were doing that, and that I needed to be more compassionate and forgive them rather than them changing their behavior to stop hurting me. And note that their being compassionate wasn't just forgiveness, it was allowing them to repeatedly make the same pernicious, soul-crushing, more than mistakes, but abusive behaviors, and I would just have to put up with it, be it under the guise of false compassion. So very, very simply, people grow up, read a book, read a book, and read a book. Read a book.